Welcome to this week's episode of the Practical SQL Server HA show. My name is Edwin Sarmiento, and welcome to this episode or this show. The purpose of this show is for technical operators, and what I mean technical operators, you're part of the database administration team, you're a systems administrator, or sometimes you happen to be sitting right beside a database server. You know how to spell SQL, and now you're given the responsibility to take care of your databases. While I focus on high availability and disaster recovery of SQL Server databases for this, I try to dive deep into always-on availability groups, primarily because Microsoft has made it like kind of like the go-to, the ultimate high availability and disaster recovery solution for SQL Server, even though customers sometimes might not necessarily need it. So if you're a technical operator and you happen to be given the responsibility of taking care of always-on availability groups, this is for you. I provide insights, lessons, tips and tricks, sometimes mistakes and blunders that I've made, and those that I've seen my customers make throughout the years dealing with high availability and disaster recovery solutions on the Microsoft Data Platform. Not just always on availability, but in general. And the first part is for technical operators. The second part is for decision makers, whether you're the manager of the information technology department or the team lead for your database team, database administration team. I don't want to say database team. It's a team of databases. Or you're the CIO and you're looking at evaluating always-on availability groups and integrating it with other solutions that you have. This is also for you, where I share, lessons that I've learned both from my personal experiences as well as from my customers. I wanted to kind of spice, I don't want to say spice it up a bit, but with the new version of SQL Server 2025, part of that is Microsoft also changing the logo. In fact, this is why you saw that logo on the banner, or the I don't know how to call this, but that's one of the reasons why I've incorporated that in the show title. Slowly, I still don't know when Microsoft will officially release SQL Server 2025, but of course, with the version number comes the year. This year is 2025, and this is SQL Server 2025. So I'm guessing Microsoft's going to do it later this year. Now, I want to talk about for this episode, and I want to kind of like continue on with the conversation around troubleshooting. Now, for the past couple of episodes, I focused on kind of like what you do when something happens or when an outage happens, like the troubleshooting aspects. I've covered the science and the art of performing troubleshooting or addressing issues with always-on availability groups. I've covered how I do my step-by-step process, or kind of like my workflow process for addressing outages. I've also covered like how I use the client-server model to troubleshoot and identify issues when it comes to always-on availability groups. But this is one thing that I haven't seen experts, even Microsoft, deal with. And this is very, very important. For the past couple of years that I've been working with high availability and disaster recovery, this is something that is rarely even covered on trainings, on online courses, even with when you attend events. Again, this is something that is barely paid attention to, but this is part. I wouldn't want to say it's just part, but this is kind of like the main thing, all right? And I call this the mental game of what you have to be in, your state of mind when you're troubleshooting an outage. And disasters in general. And this is not just for SQL Server Always On availability groups, but primarily for anything that has something to do with disasters. I just wanted to highlight this on Always On availability groups. And like I said, this is barely paid attention to. Technical experts, vendors, Microsoft consultants, they rarely even talk about this. For one, they really wanted to focus on the technical aspects, like what I've done in the past couple of episodes where I talked about this is the process of troubleshooting, this is what I would do. But rarely do people focus on this, but this determines the outcome of your troubleshooting exercise. It is even more important when you're dealing with an outage. And I remember doing my SQL Server Always On availability groups, the Senior DBA's Ultimate Field Guide training class for the first time. And this was way back 2017 when Brent Ozar and I partnered to do this online. And I was walking the students and the trainees on the troubleshooting, the very first troubleshooting exercise, because I did like 2 or 3 troubleshooting exercises, and I did this, okay? I showed them what the issue was, and after we've gone through the troubleshooting exercise, one attendee said, well, I felt like I skipped a heartbeat while we were doing the troubleshooting. And that is not even real. It's a simulated environment. And this is one of the reasons why I tell customers you really have to work on this, because a troubleshooting exercise, or in this case, an outage situation, is in the previous episode that I covered, it's an emergency situation. I call it the 911 situation, where you're in that state of mind where you're either in a fight, flight, or freeze state. I forgot the other F, but the 4 states. Because it's not something that you experience on a day-to-day basis. I mean, it's just human nature, right? Every day you go through the notions, like for instance, you go to work, you get on your car, you drive. That's your normal day-to-day. And then all of a sudden, okay, while you're driving through the highway, an accident happens, or you're involved in an accident, you got hit, and you don't know how to respond, because you rarely get into an accident, okay? It's normal, it's human nature that when an emergency situation happens, something that we've never experienced before, the way our brain works, the way our psychology works, is completely whacked. Whacked is a technical term. And this determines whether or not troubleshooting and dealing with an outage becomes a successful exercise, meaning you bring the database online as quickly as you possibly can, or it would take you hours after hours. This is what spells the difference between somebody who is really, really good, an expert, a master at what they do, and somebody who's fumbling around. And this is not even the distinction between a junior and an expert, right? A junior or a senior, because most of the time we associate skills with like the amount of years or the number of years that they've been working in the industry. And I've seen so many cases of my customers where even senior engineers, people with decades of experience, freeze when they're trying to troubleshoot an outage situation. And again, it's not something that we deal with on a regular basis, and I hope not. Unless, of course, you work for a managed services provider and part of your job is to deal with outages for different customers, or you work with Microsoft. For Microsoft. So let's take a look at this, right? The mental game, okay, when you're troubleshooting always on available groups or troubleshooting any type of emergencies. Because you have to be in the right state of mind. This is one thing that what I include in my training class before I even start the troubleshooting exercise, is putting yourself in a state of mind where you're ready, okay? You are ready to troubleshoot those issues. Grab your pen and paper, start taking notes. Let's have a look at the very first point. When you're dealing with an outage situation, an emergency situation, a 911 situation, keep calm. Keep calm. Because panic will only make it worse. Like I said, it is unusual for you to deal with emergencies day in and day out. Unusual. In fact, the body, our body is not designed to handle emergency situations on a regular basis. I mean, it messes with your psyche, it messes with your way of thinking, it messes with everything about you. And it is important when you do encounter an outage situation that you keep your calm. Again, it is very difficult, especially in your day-to-day work where all you're doing is fighting fires. Not necessarily outage situations, but somebody opening a ticket and they're marking it as severity 1 when in fact it's really not severity 1. I remember those times when we go back to the days when we still have Nokia phones. Nokia phones. This was before the iPhone. And the Nokia ringtone has been associated with high stress levels because, again, back in those days when you're on call, somebody would call you. And so the mere fact that you heard a Nokia ringtone would cause your blood pressure to increase, your heart rate to increase. And same thing. And I remember this when I was working as an operational DBA. I would get pages and alerts from our monitoring systems where it would be categorized as severity 1, where it's an outage situation. And because I worked for a managed services provider, it's not just one system. It's like a couple of different systems. So the mere fact that I have to respond to an emergency like that, where I have to deal with an outage, it becomes chaotic from my psyche. Especially if it happens at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're the only person having to deal with it. So very, very, very important, keep your calm. I remember one of my customers, I was brought in to do a project for a customer, and the CIO pointed out that, hey, why are you so calm? I told him, I get paid to be calm. It is very, very important for me to stay calm when emergency situation happens. Like I said, because people are so not used to dealing with emergency situations, they don't know how to respond properly. And so the person who is the calmest will always be in the right state of mind to address issues. You can be blindsided by so many different things while you're troubleshooting an outage because you're freaking out. You could miss an action item, even if you have a run book where you're following steps to bring a server online, to bring a database online. If you are not calm, you might miss that step. This reminded me of one of the cases that I worked with. This was prior to always on availability groups. And you know how it is when you would configure a database backup strategy where you have a full and log backups. And what you would do is you have a full database backup daily and log backups every 15 minutes. So in total, you would have like 96 to 4, 8, 12, 6, yeah, about 96 transactional log backups and one full database backup for an entire day. I was brought in to address an issue from way back, and they were trying to recover a database. We're not even talking about an entire server. We're trying to recover a database. Again, this was way back before always on availability groups. And the DBA accidentally restored a transaction log backup that wasn't the latest transaction log backup. And it's very easy to make that mistake, especially if you're looking at 96 transaction log backups and one full database backup. Imagine what it's like, because restoring transaction log backups, and of course this was way back when SQL Server did not support instant file initialization for LDF files. because he missed, or he brought the database online, he recovered the database before the latest transaction log backup. He had to do everything all over again. He had to go back and restore the full, and then a series of transaction log backups. Just because he was freaking out, he was panicking while he was restoring the log backup. So again, keep your calm. Keep your calm. Take a deep breath, relax, and keep your calm. It is very challenging to do this, especially if your day-to-day, part of your day-to-day involves dealing with emergency situations and firefighting. Very difficult, because now it becomes, it paralyzes your psyche, and it messes around with your rational way of doing things. Again, even if you have a run book, you're following every step in that run book, you will still miss steps, miss tasks, just because you're, again, this is very important. Like I said, and nobody talks about this in emergency situations or when you're troubleshooting always on available groups. Nobody talks about this because it's not technical, right? It's not dealing with failover cluster or an AG or listener or network. It's not technical. It's just you. Okay. So again, keep calm. Keep yourself calm. Take a deep breath. Okay. Even before you start the troubleshooting exercise. In fact, I highly recommend even 5 minutes a day of deep breathing exercises, just to keep yourself calm. In the middle of the day, take time off of your busy day. 5 minutes of deep breathing exercise, it will regulate your nervous system. And I know this is, probably you might be thinking, what is this guy talking about? It's not SQL Server. Yes, but your state of mind, whether you're freaking out or you're calm, will determine whether or not the troubleshooting exercise or you bringing the databases online as quickly as you possibly can would take 5 minutes or 4 hours. Okay. Second one, expectations. And this is very important as well, because for one, in high availability and or disaster recovery solutions, you already have some expectations. For one, you have your typical expectations, your recovery point objective, recovery time objective, your service level agreements. The minute that an outage situation happens is the moment that the clock started counting towards your recovery time objective. Okay? Yes, recovery time objective. So if you have like a 2-hour SLA or 1 hour SLA, the minute that you got an alert, or the minute that the system went down, because sometimes the system went down, but then the monitoring isn't in sync with that, it might have a few minutes or seconds of delay. But the minute that the system goes down is the moment that the clock started counting towards your recovery time objective. But in addition to those expectations that you've already set, it is also important for you to communicate those expectations as you're doing the work. What do I mean by that? It is, again, put yourself in this situation where it is an emergency. You got a phone call, 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't know why it's always 3 o'clock in the morning. You got that phone call. You are in that state where you're ready to address this issue. But you have to realize as well that stakeholders are now informed, meaning your boss, your team lead, they've been informed of this outage situation. They want to be a part of it. They also wanted to help. But because they're also not ready for situations where they're also freaking out because they're not calm, one of the things that they would end up doing is hover behind your back and ask questions. Is this fine? When is this coming back online? Sometimes in an online setting where you have distributed teams, you're all on Slack, you're all on Teams, and then somebody is constantly messaging, hey, when is this coming back online? When is this coming back online? Or even on emails. right? You get like 10 emails in less than 5 minutes asking the same question. When is this coming back online? So part of the setting the expectation is, one, communicating, or rather, setting the expectations that you're setting boundaries while you're doing this. Meaning, when you're doing when you're troubleshooting an outage, you have to tell everybody, I got this, and please do not disturb me while I'm doing this. Because anytime somebody would come in and disturb you, that's time taken away from your recovery time objective. Imagine it this way: you're working on bringing the database online, you get a phone call, and you see from your caller ID, it's your CTO. Even looking at the phone, reading the caller ID, and then picking up the phone and answering the phone, that already took a couple of seconds from you troubleshooting an outage situation. Imagine responding to that phone call, talking to your CTO. That would take about a minute or two. Plus, again, if you're not calm, you might ramble. That would take an additional 2 or 3 minutes. That already took time away from the time that you're supposed to be spending troubleshooting an outage situation. Okay, so set that expectation, set that boundary. Okay, if you are fixing the issue, if you're troubleshooting an outage, set that boundary. This is the expectation, don't bother me. But of course, you cannot help and you cannot avoid those people in charge. Again, your database team lead, your manager, your CTO, they would ask for an update, for a status update. It's just normal because they're also responsible for it. So communicate those expectations. I tell my customers all the time, you can steal this canned response. I'm doing my best to bring the databases online as quickly as I possibly can. That's it. You can steal that. I'm doing my best to bring the databases online as quickly as I possibly can. That would take less than 10 seconds. Or put that in a notepad app on your computer. Type that out. If it's on an email or Slack message, copy, paste, keep going. Okay, but of course they still want an update, so make it a habit that every let's say every 10 minutes you would update everybody. If that's a ticketing solution or ticketing system, update the ticket. Even whatever the situation is, even if it's as simple as did this, didn't work, trying this. Okay, or if you're communicating on Slack, did this, didn't work, I'm trying this. At least they're keeping up to date with the situation. Okay, so you set and communicate expectations. Again, it's but natural. That's also one of the reasons why it's important for you to keep calm. Again, the first point, keep your calm, because if you don't, it would also take longer for you to communicate those expectations, and of course setting those boundaries as well as you're setting those expectations. Okay, the third one is, this is something that I learned when I was working as operational DBA. In our employee introduction, I forgot what it's called. In our I don't even want to think about the word. When you're brought in, you're a brand new employee, and you're getting. So part of what my manager told me is, don't try to be a hero. Okay, don't try to be a hero. What does that mean? It is well natural for us, because this is part of what we do. You get an alert, you get a ticket, you take you take ownership of the ticket, you start working on the issue, and you feel like it's your responsibility to bring the databases online, no matter what happens. You fall into that, and that's great, because you're taking full responsibility. Okay. However, because again, without keeping your calm, without setting the expectation, we fall into this trap of trying to prove ourselves, especially if you're new in a company or especially if you're starting out in your career. You want to prove yourself. So imagine, again, a situation where you have an outage situation, you get the ticket, you take ownership of the ticket, you start working on the issue. 45 minutes later, you haven't made progress. And so what you do is you start doing your research. Go to Google, paste a section of the error message, resolve the issue, go through Stack Overflow or Stack Exchange or Reddit or Slack, or that's an additional 5 minutes that you've already spent doing your research instead of troubleshooting the issue. Okay? Don't try to be a hero. If you've gone past a certain threshold for addressing, and that's why it's also important for you to know beforehand what those expectations are when it comes to recovery time, objective, and SLA. Because if not, you will end up spending your time, taking your time, researching, going on your favorite search engine, typing the error messages, keywords, all of that, and not bringing the databases online. If you are, if you're responsible for this and you're part of a team where you have escalation engineers, don't waste your time. Pick up the phone, call the next on the escalation path, and hand over the ticket, hand over the issue. Don't try to be a hero. Okay, this is not the time to play hero. And I've seen this, again, I've seen this happen for with junior DBAs, junior sysadmins, or people who are new in the company. They want to prove themselves, and so they end up wasting a lot of time before they even escalate. Okay? Know your limits. Don't try to be a hero. If at certain point within that SLA or that RTO, you figured, hey, I can't do anything about this. I spent like 10, 15 minutes. Escalate. Okay, it's a little bit challenging, of course, if you're the only person on the team, or you're a one-man shop and you're taking care of everything. But again, don't try to be a hero. Escalate. If again you're in that situation where you're the only person on a team, have somebody you can call right off the bat. Whether that's a managed services provider, a consultant that you can bring in as a on a retainer, do that. Don't try to be a hero, because at this point you're cutting close or you're wasting time instead of trying to address the issue. This is easier said than done, especially for type A personalities. This is easier said than done, especially when mission critical systems are online. Okay. Did I say 4 points or 3? This is the 4th one. Build mental toughness through repetition. Everything that I've said, everything that I've covered so far throughout this series, I don't want to call it a series, but everything that I've covered throughout every single episode that focuses on troubleshooting are all geared towards you preparing for an emergency situation, dealing with an emergency situation, but also hoping and praying you don't have to go through an emergency situation. But apparently, that's not how the world works, right? Issues will happen, downtime will happen, emergencies will happen, and so you have to learn how to deal with it. I've had customers who, when they attended my training class from way back when, reached out to me and said, hey, we actually forgot that we have an always-on availability groups, because it's humming along, performance-wise, it's great, availability-wise, it's awesome. We even forgot that it's there because we barely touch it unless we have to install a cumulative update or perform maintenance. That's it. That is the goal. Okay? The goal is to build, architect, deploy the stable, reliable, highly available infrastructure that you almost forget that it's there. But on the flip side, I'm not delusional, issues will happen. And so your job is to make sure that you're prepared for this. I've learned this. I've learned this as as I was in the Army Reserve training, people in the military, law enforcement officers, firefighters, they would rehearse, practice, they would enhance their skills, hoping and praying that they don't have to use them. Okay, if you're somebody who's a Navy SEALs, for instance, you go through rigorous training on a regular basis, hoping and praying that no war ever breaks out, that you get to be deployed. Okay, that's the thing. Okay, you practice, you build a non-production system, you mimic your production environment, not necessarily the compute resources, because what if you had like a 256 core, 2 terabyte server, okay, with 25 terabyte sized databases. You don't want to replicate the compute and storage resources. You just want to replicate kind of like the architecture, a smaller scale version of that architecture on a non-production environment. And then you simulate issues, like you take down the entire cluster, or you introduce the issues with firewall rules, or if you're using a readable secondary, imagine causing schema locks on a database that the secondary replica is causing schema locks as it's reading the data from the secondary databases. Cause issues, and then troubleshoot those issues, and then document it, and then do it again, and then do it again. The problem with that, of course, is we are not used to doing that because it's not part of our day-to-day. Okay, I think it was a couple of days ago or early last week when the AWS outage happened. Okay, a lot of companies, their systems went offline because they were not ready for that. Okay, they do not have a disaster recovery strategy because they have everything on AWS, so they don't know how to respond, because they have not planned for it. Part of what you need to do is to build mental toughness through repetition. Okay, this spells the difference between, again, troubleshooting an outage within 5 minutes versus taking 4 hours, because you have not built that mental toughness. You want to deal with outage situations where everything's just muscle memory. You've done it so many times that you know which tools to use, you know how long it takes for you to run a command, a query. You've built that so you don't actually panic. Okay? Of course, it's not a guarantee. That's also one of the reasons why the first point that I mentioned is to keep your calm. Okay? Because just because you've done it so many times doesn't mean you're ready. Your skills might be ready, but your psychology has to be in alignment with your skill set. So you have to build mental toughness through repetition, rebuild your environment, destroy the environment. The one thing that I tell database administrators, even in as simple as recovering databases. Sure, you're using enterprise backup solutions. Have you ever tried restoring your backups and timing the amount of time it takes, measuring the amount of time it takes to recover a database? Yes, that is part of what you need to do, because otherwise, again, you can blow up or you can go beyond your recovery time objective because you haven't done it yet. And just like the story that I mentioned where the DBA accidentally recovered the databases, restoring a series of transaction log backups, even before restoring the latest transaction log backup. He was panicking, and so he had to do it all over again, which means it will take almost twice the time it took for him to recover that database at that point. Okay? So again, repetition. The key to mastery, the key to being confident that the solution that you built actually works is through repetition. And you don't want to do this in an emergency situation. You want to do this before emergency situation happens so that you know exactly what to do. This is how Netflix came up with the concept of a chaos monkey. Yeah, it was Netflix. A chaos monkey, where they would introduce systems, and I don't recommend that you do this in a production environment yet. until you know for a fact that you built systems and processes and tools that allow you to actually introduce issues in a production environment and see how your system behaves. Netflix has this concept of a chaos monkey. They would introduce kind of like throwing a wrench in a machine and see how it responds. And if you've built processes and tools and systems in place to deal with something like that, you wouldn't even blink when something like an AWS outage happens, even if you have your entire system on AWS, because you built the entire solution with the idea that something will break, and that you've built your orchestration, your automation, your tools, your processes and systems to address those kinds of issues, right? Did I cover everything? No, I haven't really covered everything, but those are the important things. Things that people do not pay attention to when it comes to dealing with outage situations where you have to keep your mind, your psychology, your psyche tamed. I want to say tamed because it's not something that you do every day. Dealing with emergencies is not something that we do every day, and so you have to prepare yourself. Okay, even in my case, what I would do is I would, whenever I get a consulting project, is before I start working with a customer, I would ask for their architecture, recreate their architecture in my my lab environment, and then simulate issues. That way, if there are issues while we're working on their system, I know exactly how to deal with it. So I've already done the prep work even before we start the consulting engagement because I need to be ready, okay? In case they're not, and something goes wrong, right? That's about it for this week's episode of the Practical SQL Server HA show. And again, I hope this is valuable. I see this as the most valuable thing, okay? Because the way you respond to an emergency situation has nothing to do with your skills. It has everything to do with your state of mind as you're dealing with an emergency situation. That spells the difference, okay? Not having 10 years of experience, or a junior guy who barely has any experience. It really boils down to the mental game, the state of mind of the person dealing with an emergency situation when things go wrong. Okay, that is about it for this week's episode of the Practical SQL Server HA show. Tune in again next week for another episode. And again, if you need help with anything, like for instance, you realize, hey, we haven't really prepared for any outage situation yet, or our DR strategy is not where we want it to be. Use that link on the screen. Schedule a strategy session and let's have a conversation. Happy to help in any way I can with dealing with not just SQL Server always on availability groups, but anything SQL Server high availability and disaster recovery solution. Whether again you're in the process of building an always on availability groups, you're not sure whether this is the right strategy or the right solution for you, or you already have it, but then you realize that your team's not ready to address outage situations or DR incidents. Reach out, use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session, and let's have that conversation. This will lead you to my calendar page where you can pick and choose a time that works for you. Okay, in that call, I call it the strategy call. We will be focusing on two things. One, what is your current and immediate challenge that you need to address? We'll get clear on that. And then the second one is what would be the next step, meaning what strategy, what approach, what solution you would have to pursue in order to address those challenges. And if I can help you resolve those challenges, I will. If not, I will steer you in a direction that would help serve you best. That is about it. And I'm still experimenting on some of the tools that I'm using with every episode. Again, tune in again for the next episode of the Practical SQL Server HA show. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'll see you again next time.